Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. Our presentation today is going to be on the book Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown, a 2021 published book based on 2 decades plus worth of research into the various ways that human beings have learned to color their experiences through our emotional interpretations. So, just as an intro here to get us started, I'd like to discuss brief history of color. In the 20th century, around 1910 to 1912, the Crayola box had around 8 colors in it. And it was quite the to-do when the 16 color box came out. However, as most people in this class probably remember from their own youth, by the 80s and 90s, it was pretty common to see a 64 color box. And once in a while, maybe there was even that kid who had that big 128 box of colors. That's a lot of different colors that children in our culture have learned to distinguish from one another, varying subtle shades. So in cultures, they say that color words generally develop first. You get like words for red and brown, earth tones, greens, then blues, and later on purples and oranges and other things get distinguished. But some cultures will have words where we might say, oh, that's orange, or that's a reddish, or that's like a scarlet or a crimson. These different subtle variations of hues of red, where all of that might be grouped under one word. There's several African cultures who use the same word for green and blue, and it's distinguishment based off of it being like a not reddish hue. So bringing this kind of full circle into our work as clinicians, here we have this wonderful book by Brené Brown that goes into great detail, kind of describing a big group of possible colors. So as clinicians, one of our main jobs is to be able to help our clients distinguish subtlety between the emotions that they're feeling, to help parse out and tease out the details so there's a greater degree of clarity rather than all these colors muddled together making like just brown hues. We're able to tease out the various blues and the greens and the oranges and the yellows and the purples, etc., to be able to create this much fuller resolution picture of what's going on with our patients. And so, we're all coming into this as aspiring clinicians with our own little coloring box from personal experience, where we've learned how to be with a lot of these different types and styles of emotion. However, a great book like this is like that 128 box of crayons that really allows us to fill out our own color repertoire so that we're better equipped to provide the crayon our client needs in the moment. So each one of us is covering a different part of the book that we are really focused on, that really spoke to us, that we felt has an impact and direct meaning, that's going to be very helpful as we do this clinical work of bringing greater resolution, color, clarity, and saturation to our clients' self-interpretations and understanding in this co-creative artistic process of cultivating healthy self-pictures. So I hope you enjoy our presentation, and thank you for joining us today.
Shame. I chose chapter 8. It really spoke to me. It kind of tied the whole book together for me in a certain way. Brené Brown talks about guilt, shame, humiliation, and embarrassment in this chapter, but I think it really focuses on shame. And I think it really particularly spoke to me because I have my own experience of shame that I work on in myself and in my therapy, and I see it come up a lot for clients as well. So it feels particularly salient as a theme right now. Brené says that shame is born from a sense of badness, a sense that we are unworthy of love. And she says that the antidote to shame is empathy. Really like that. Shame is a social emotion. We experience shame together in relation to one another, and we heal shame together. And that's really important. It's not something that can exist sort of in a sort of microcosm within oneself. It actually involves relationship. And that's how it comes to be, and that's how we can quell it in ourselves. So she talks a lot about self-compassion, and she gets into, she calls it shame resilience. She has 4 points that make up shame resilience. The first is, and really they can go in any order, it's just that they all need to be present in order to start to build resilience around shame. So recognizing shame, that's being able to name triggers. Can you name when you're in the grip of shame? And then practicing critical awareness. Can you check your expectations? Why are you feeling ashamed? Are you setting expectations or goals that are unfair or not realistic? Are those coming from the outside world or from you internally? Probably they're coming from the outside world, and that's why you feel ashamed. And then the other two are reaching out and speaking up, which are, to me, connected. We have to share our experiences of shame with each other. We have to talk about them in order for us to be able to heal. And if we are in isolation, that's the breeding ground for shame. So those are a few of the main points. She also gets into shame and perfectionism. And I think that that's a really interesting piece. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that chapter if you're interested in understanding perfectionism more. And then the last piece that I think is really moving is that she says that we can't have empathy if we are feeling shame. That shame and empathy are in fact incompatible experiences. So I'll leave it there for my chapter summary.
In reading Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, the chapter that I enjoyed the most was chapter 11, Places We Go When Life is Good. According to Brown's research, this includes joy, happiness, calm, contentment, gratitude, foreboding joy, relief, and tranquility. In reflecting on why I connected so much with this chapter, I think it's because it reminded me of one of my favorite Dalai Lama quotes, which is, "The purpose of life is to be happy." In overlapping this notion with community mental health, it seems to me that with marginalized populations, the focus is largely on relieving suffering more than enhancing happiness. And then I got curious about this, wondering, is it unrealistic to think that people suffering from trauma might also want to focus on happiness? In other words, is it just a function of my privilege that I am motivated by this as a focus? I'd love to hear what other people think about this. And either way, I got a real spark from this chapter, as I can see it really enriching my therapy practice, but more on that later. So as Brown defined the nuances between these feelings, which I'm not going to go into all of them here, I'm going to focus on just a couple, it occurred to me that I am somewhat addicted to the state of joy, which Brown describes as sudden, unexpected, short-lasting, and high intensity. It's characterized by a connection with others, with God, nature, or the universe. And the word connection really jumped out at me. I've been having a lot of conversations lately with people, friends and clients alike, about the importance of connection and just really honing in on how suffering happens with disconnection and healing happens with connection. So the other piece in this chapter that resonated with me was the section on foreboding joy. This is what happens when you feel joyful about something and then your fear that it will be taken from you gets in the way and you deliberately stop yourself from feeling the joy so you won't be disappointed later. Brown says that this is one of those practically universal experiences that everyone thinks of as something only they do. When we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. We are terrified of being blindsided by pain, so we practice tragedy and trauma. And I see this around me very often, and I reflected on how it intersects with community mental health's focus on marginalized populations who are often in a fairly constant state of vulnerability.
Chapter 12, The Places We Go When We Feel Wronged. Anger is an emotion that for so many of my clients, and myself included, wasn't allowed to be expressed growing up. So when anger shows up now, or where you'd expect it to show up, I see it exiled and misunderstood, repressed, denied, feared, and even hated. Brené starts off the chapter by citing some important research that, quote, expressing chronic anger is crucial for the health of our brain and other organs in the body, end quote. She firmly advocates that anger is often the most compassionate reaction to experiencing or witnessing injustice. Wow, what an incredible reframe. Brené often repeats some really powerful things she's written, and I'm just going to do that again because I really feel this is a big one. Anger is often the most compassionate response to experiencing or witnessing injustice. When we deny this important messenger and protector of our boundaries, we suffer because we invalidate ourselves or others' pain. And often, anger is co-present with one or more other emotions. And if we either get stuck in internalizing our anger or acting out of a place of anger without listening to it and sitting with it, we might also miss the emotional nuance of an experience. She says it's kind of like an alarm bell that's trying to say, hey, listen up, something really important is happening. She also goes on to talk about contempt, disgust, and dehumanization. That one really made its mark on me. She believes dehumanization is one of our greatest threats to humanity, and I would have to agree. Brené borrows a quote from a philosophy professor named Michelle Maeve to describe the process. She says it's the psychological process of demonizing the enemy, making them seem less than human and hence not worthy of humane treatment. It seems to me that dehumanization contains anger, contempt, and disgust. It's responsible for the world's worst atrocities. This is the territory of exclusion, when groups become so polarized and separated that the world becomes us versus them. And I can't help but think back to the chapter Maeve presented, which included a description of humiliation. Brown shares a quote from Kofi Annan, a Ghanaian diplomat and Nobel Peace Prize recipient. It goes like this. All the cruel and brutal things, even genocide, start with the humiliation of one individual. End quote. Brown makes the link between dehumanization and humiliation and points out how these two experiences are becoming increasingly normalized. Especially given how one post can go viral these days, we are now not only vulnerable to humiliation in just our community, but in front of the entire world. Okay, that was a lot, so now I just want to invite you to take a deep breath and shake out your body if you need to. I felt it was really important to touch on these difficult emotions as none of us is immune to them. And furthermore, if we can learn about these feeling states, we can get better at catching them and then doing something with them and about them. I'll leave you with a picture from the book that offers the antidotes to criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling.
With regards to how I intend to use Chapter 11 to inform my therapy practice, I find it an incredibly helpful tool to have language for these different feel-good states, especially as my clients often have a hard time articulating their therapy goals. I'll often get answers like, I just want to return to my old self. And when we explore further what this means, it often leads to a discussion of how content, calm, or happy they used to feel and how they want to bring those states back. It also ties into Brown's discussion of Matthew Quan Johnson's research, in which he suggests that while experiencing joy, people don't lose themselves, they become more truly themselves. And this also seems to map well to this therapy goal theme of, I want to feel more like my old self. And lastly, in reflecting further on the theme of connection, which surfaced a lot in this chapter, I believe that this concept fits in well with therapy utilizing a community mental health lens, as I see having connection with others, God, nature, or the universe as a form of community. Again, I'd love to hear what other people think about this.
So, as I posted on Canvas originally, I was skeptical of this book. I was skeptical of Brené Brown, but ultimately I really enjoyed it. I thought it was quite palatable. I think the cool thing about it is that it's a book that anybody can read and start to understand more about human psychology and why we feel the way we feel and why we behave the way we behave. So in that sense, I think it's a really great book. I would definitely say that it could be useful to recommend for clients who are starting to be able to name their feelings, people who might be developmentally at an earlier stage in terms of how to identify emotions, could benefit from this book. Brené's style of writing is pretty kind and clear and caring. And I found it a really nice read. In terms of how it can benefit the field and my work as a clinician, I took a lot away from particularly the chapter that I presented on. Naming shame, where it comes from, and how to help clients identify and shift patterns around it. Feels really useful. I have a lot of clients for whom shame is a big theme. And I also think that it can be really useful to help us understand more narcissistically organized patients, as well as larger societal structuring around narcissism and how that is born out of shame.
One concept that I got out of this book that just has continued to impact my work from day to day is Brené Brown's distinction between belonging and fitting in. She describes belonging as not requiring us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are, whereas fitting in is just trying to be like everybody else. This is so personally relevant for me, and I just think that collectively we're all going through this in some way or another. And so just knowing the difference and being able to reflect that back to people, noticing when we're trying to fit in versus why can't we be ourselves, it's just such a fruitful question. So I'd say that in general, this entire book has been pretty incredible for me. I do a lot of IFS and parts work, and so just being in the terrain of nuance and multiple emotions and self-states are just really, really an integral part of how I work. And so just kind of like what Hudson was saying earlier, the more colors in the box that I can recognize and bring other folks' attention to, I just think can really help us get to know who we are and honor the messengers that our feelings are. So I would highly recommend this book.
To conclude this presentation, our consensus was that this book provides a lot of helpful information about the nuances of emotions, which will come in handy as we collaborate with our clients on understanding and naming their emotions. From a community mental health perspective, we felt that chapter number 9, which focuses on places we go when we search for connection, provides very rich language around the emotions of belonging, fitting in, connection, disconnection, insecurity, invisibility, and loneliness, which again are themes that seem very, very much aligned with, community mental health. And the last chapter in the book, which is on cultivating meaningful connection, also seemed very much aligned with community mental health, as it focuses a lot on how to be with versus being above our clients.